All right, welcome back to Bigfoot's Wilderness. I've got a new encounter story for you tonight, and it's a little bit unusual. It's called Spirits and Sasquatch, so let me go ahead and get right into it. Mike, I'm pretty sure this may be one of your more unusual reports. Some might consider me lucky or maybe even more receptive to the supernatural. I was told once by a palm reader that I had a bad luck streak. I don't agree with that. I feel I'm just more receptive to unusual things. I've seen some pretty incredible things, and I'm still here without a scratch to be had. But let me stay on track. Just so you know, there isn't a connection between the two stories except for me, because I witnessed them happen. Right now as I write this, I'm getting that cold chill down my arms and back. Well, let me tell you for sure what I think almost anyone would consider supernatural. When I was 12, our family took a trip to Washington, D.C. to visit my great aunt, who was celebrating her 75th birthday. Some of our relatives wanted to get together and throw her a big party. We lived in Indiana at the time, and all of us, including my two younger brothers, were really excited because she lived near the Smithsonian Museum and the National Zoo. One thing you don't forget is the cluster of apartments and buildings and row houses on practically every block as we travel closer to the White House. As I recall, the house itself was gigantic. It was a classic DC row house. Each room was built like a big rectangle, and the staircase was wide and grand. It had one of those sturdy wooden railings that tempted you to ride down it. My brothers were younger at 9 and 6, and if you know kids, well, they always follow whatever the big brother does. After we wished our aunt happy birthday and ate cake, we would run in circles around the guests and all around the house. As I took the lead, we approached the stairs, and I yelled, "Race ya!" And up we went, clattering and clambering to the top. A long hallway intersected the top of the stairs, and as we walked around, staring at old family pictures and furnishings, I could smell the sweet smell of tobacco, like the kind you smoke in a pipe. I just about peed my pants when I heard a loud, harsh voice say, "What are you boys doing up here? Where's your mother?" My eyes were wide and I felt lightheaded as a very tall man dressed in a gray suit began to walk towards us from down the hall. I don't think I've ever screamed so loud in my 12 years. He was absolutely frightening as he had no legs. His top half was floating down the hallway towards us. I took off screaming and racing for the steps to get away from this ghostly spirit, and knocked over a heavy hallway chair, making a tremendous crash which prompted my mother and aunt to meet us at the bottom of the steps. My eyes were wide as I raced down the stairs with my brothers in tow right behind me. As we tried to explain, my mother and aunt tried to console us and have us rejoin the party. After I'd calmed down, my curiosity was getting the best of me, and I snuck back to the staircase and saw something that I will always remember. My aunt, whose husband was deceased and had died almost 40 years prior, walked up to those stairs and spoke to Philip, as in her late husband. "Philip, please don't scare our guests, please. We're having a party, and it's my birthday. Promise me you'll be on your best behavior." Chills were running down my spine as I listened to her pleading with the ghostly presence. And if that wasn't fantastic enough, when I asked my brothers what they saw, they said they saw nothing. They just saw me react to something and got scared and followed me back down the stairs. "You didn't hear him yell at us?" "No, the only person yelling was you." "So, was it talking only to me?" "I guess I'll never know." A few years later, we traveled back to D.C. for her funeral. I'll never forget that day. 6 years later, after graduating high school, I moved to the West Coast. I always wanted to live by the ocean. I also wanted to attend UC Berkeley, but my grades weren't that good, so my plan was to attend Vista Community College. I think it's now called Berkeley City College. and I needed to get my grades up with the goal of transferring. I had made a few friends at school and picked up a job as a waiter at a nearby restaurant. I didn't have a car, so everything had to be fairly close. Having roommates really helped cut some of the expenses. I camped a lot while I was a Boy Scout back in Ohio, and when I heard someone mention taking a trip to the Sierras for the weekend, I was like a kid again. Ohio has a good mix of flat and hilly, but nothing like the mountains of California. I couldn't wait to explore it. My friend Lee borrowed a station wagon complete with a rear-facing seat in the way back. Remember those? I remember a winding road that weaved through a good portion of the mountains and forest. My friends were familiar with the area and wanted to camp in a particular spot that involved a hike about a mile or two. The forests were thick with rocky outcroppings. It really had a way of making you feel small and insignificant. If I recall correctly, Stanislaus National Forest was almost 1,000,000 acres. As the four of us hiked up the mountain, we looked like an offshoot of the French Foreign Legion with our ratty bedrolls and oversized backpacks. Lee, my best friend, had brought his dad's hand-me-down, a Sig Sauer, which would be essential if we were attacked by groundhogs. It wasn't going to bring down any big game, that's for sure. He took quite a bit of ribbing from all of us. As we approached the clearing of where we'd be staying, we apparently spooked something. There was quite a bit of rustling and what I thought sounded like big bodies moving. Tree branches and leaves were still kind of shaking, and I was certain that I caught a glimpse and said to myself, "Man, a big man, on 2 feet and dressed all in brown. Did you see that guy?" "What guy?" I guess I was the only one that saw anything. Of course, I had my head up, looking ahead. Oh, that's disgusting. Across the rocky clearing was the body of a deer, a doe, and it was right about where we wanted to set up camp. Rigor mortis hadn't set in yet, so Lee mentioned that whatever killed it had to be recent. We couldn't find the wound at first, but once we rolled it over, we immediately saw that one of its back legs and thigh were missing. It was pretty gruesome to look at. It didn't take an outdoorsman to see that the leg and thigh had been twisted off and the neck looked to be crushed or maybe squeezed. As the four of us huddled around the carcass, I felt like something was watching us. Right where I saw something on 2 legs, all in brown, disappear. And then there was the unmistakable stomping of feet, accompanied by sticks breaking. I'm not the only one hearing this, right? I've got an idea. Let's get rid of this thing. What do you mean? How? Let's just pitch it over the ledge so we can camp here. Here? With all this blood? Being a Boy Scout and having what's called common sense should be enough to know that this isn't a good scenario, but I had to try and reason with my friend Roddy. I don't know, man. It's a nice spot, but the smell would attract predators, and we've already got something pissed off over there because we scared it away from its dinner. Why don't we just keep going? It makes the most sense. Lee had a strange look on his face. Guys, come check this out. Lee was probably the most experienced of the four of us and was more familiar with the area as well. Now he was studying the ground. Look at this. Whatever left must have stepped in the blood and left tracks. It looks like maybe a bear or a person. I see toes going that way. And with that, I spoke up and told everyone what I saw. Everybody had a goofy look on their face, as if I was making up a story or being overly dramatic, so we'd just turn around and leave. Lee held out his .22 and shouted, "If there's someone out there, we don't want any trouble. We were just going to camp here." We didn't get a response, and as a matter of fact, the woods went silent. The clearing was fairly large and wide, as I recall. We set up camp away from the deer kill, and I began to agree with my friends that maybe we should just get rid of the carcass. It just seemed like a logical thing to do to keep it away. From predators, that is. but the blood was going to linger, and I seemed to be the only one concerned about it. After a few hours, we finally decided to dump the now stiff deer body. Me and Roddy grabbed the legs and swung it off and over the ledge. We watched it tumble off some rocks maybe 100 feet or so. As we turned and headed back to camp, Roddy got wide-eyed, pointed, and yelled, "Look!" In my opinion, after all these years, what we saw, to me, looked like an overgrown chimpanzee, but had more of a pointed head like a gorilla and seemed to be brown in color. I'm taller than most, at 6 feet 6 inches. I felt we were almost eye to eye, but it was definitely more muscular. It seemed to be leaning forward, and its trapezius muscles and shoulders were very well developed, making it look even more broad. In its hand, it held something which at first I thought was a branch with the bark stripped off, but then I could see its mouth, and it appeared to be chewing something. Its brow line seemed heavy, and the expression on its face seemed angry. The first thing that came to my mind was we just threw its lunch out, and hopefully we weren't its replacement. Roddy and I walked back a few steps to the side and motioned for Lee and Reed to come and check it out. As much as we teased Lee for having his .22, we'd take another shot at him. Roddy looked at Lee and mumbled, Don't get gung-ho with that pea shooter." In case for any reason he thought his gun would be helpful, which it wouldn't. I think we were all in a state of awe as time seemed to stand still while we just continued to stare at each other. We never heard it utter a word, but my opinion, of course, was that when it saw it was outnumbered, and we didn't leave, it became frustrated and smashed the deer bone to the ground and retreated into the bush. I can confidently say that there wasn't a single volunteer, including myself, that wanted to pursue it. We kind of grunted to each other, making the decision not to stay. We quickly hiked back to the car, heads on swivels, checking frequently our surroundings. Driving back home, we stopped for something to eat. We talked the whole way about what we saw, and continued our conversation while eating. We kept using words like crazy, nuts, unbelievable, and impossible. I think we spent the remainder of our trip theorizing what we'd seen. Lee mentioned that roughly 12 years ago, a creature like what we encountered had been recorded on tape in Northern California, roughly 500 miles upstate. "So it's called a Bigfoot?" I said. This was the summer of 1979, and it was the first time I ever uttered that word, and I have been enthralled with the subject since. I don't normally share my story with anyone I meet, but if the conversation segues towards the unexplainable, I just might share my story about spirits or Sasquatch. Thanks for your time, Mike, and I'll keep listening.